Good morning, everyone. I'm Rachel. I'm from a London-based organisation called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. We're a not-for-profit organisation interested in investigative journalism for the public good. We were launched in 2010, and earlier this year we launched a new project called Bureau Local, which is what I want to talk to you about. Essentially, we started to think about in this global world where we're all talking about international collaborations and global stories and big stories are breaking every day, the thing that we felt was really missing, certainly in the UK, and where there was a huge problem, was investigative reporting at a local level. Our local press, we used to have a very thriving local press, lots of newspapers in every single city and town in our country. And in the past 3 years, it has literally fallen off a cliff. So we have papers now that used to have 20, 30 people in the newsroom that are run by one person. And this means that there is just no local reporting going on. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of power in the UK being pushed out to the regions. So we've got very powerful mayors, we've got lots of money being spent in local areas, but nobody is going into the council meetings, nobody's reporting on this local power, nobody's even going into the local courts. So we're quite a small team. At the time, we were 11 people, and we wanted to come up with a way of efficiently doing more investigative journalism at a local level. So what we've done is we've built a data hub in the Bureau. This is 4 people, it's about to be 5, and they build big, ambitious databases. And then we've built a very engaged network of local journalists and civic tech people, and they share the stories that we find in the databases, and then they report our findings out at a local level, bring them back into the centre. We all share the findings, so if somebody's found something interesting in a city in the north from the data, then someone down in the south can see if there's the same problem going on in their area. We share case studies, we share legal issues, we share government comment, and then we publish all at the same time. So across the UK, we have dozens of stories going out on the same subject, and as a result, we have a lot more accountability. So I just want to show you a few of the type of stories that we've done. We launched in April. This was 6 weeks before a general election. It was a sudden general election. Nobody expected it to be called. We were 2 weeks into the project when our government announced there was going to be an election. We decided that clearly local papers with not enough staff and not enough reporters were going to really struggle to do any reporting in this area. So the team really came together. We did 4 different investigations. This is one of them where we built this technology which allowed, it was in partnership with a civic tech company. It allowed all our local papers to get their readers to download the software, and then it could monitor what adverts they were getting from political parties. We had this massive database of all the adverts that were going out on Facebook. We could share those with our local papers. They could tell us why the parties were reporting about these things at their local level. We produced a number of stories in this area. Another thing we did is we built a really ambitious database, pulling in lots of data about voters across the country, to look at new voters who voted for parties in the past which were no longer standing. And as a result, we were actually able to say that there were 23 seats that we felt our government would lose their majority. And this was something that the pollsters hadn't picked up on. And actually, all those seats that we found, the majorities massively shrunk, quite a few of them swung, and our government lost their majority. So this we did through a hack day. We had this big database. We brought 65 journalists together in 5 different places, all linked up through Skype and Google Hangouts. They spent their day working with statisticians, working with data experts, really digging into the data and finding the stories. and then in a week produce the stories. These are some of the stories that, there's some of the stories that we had out, national stories as well as local stories. In fact, our dark ads story went into the New York Times as well. And within 6 weeks of launch, we had 350 members in our network working in 85 cities in our country, and we produced 75 different stories. This was just so more than we ever expected. It was so overwhelming. And then we had to sit down and work out what on earth we were going to do. This is another story that we did a couple of weeks later. This is looking at the rise of massive big farms in our country. We built an infographic, which again is something that local papers just don't have the resources to do, so they could embed that into their reporting. We've looked at immigration checks. Again, this is all out of data. This is data that were collected. This was data that was brought to us by one of our local members, brought into the network, shared with all the papers locally, and suddenly a story that would only have gone out in Bristol was actually reported out across the country. Another story on domestic violence, again, that came out in 25 different papers. So this is where we are, 8 months in. We have 450 active members. Over 100 of those are local journalists. They're working in 90 cities. We've done 8 investigations, and we've produced 125 local stories. Those were the sort of numbers that we were hoping to get at after 2 years of the project. We've reached it in 8 months. The membership was particularly overwhelming. We thought after a year we'd have about 50 members. After 2 years we'd have 150. We've ended up with 450. So, we're sort of quite struggling to work out how we're going to make that network work better and how we can support that network better. So I just wanted to mention a few of the things that we've learnt along the way, which might be helpful. I think one of the things that we executed really well in this project is we really planned well. It took 18 months to plan this project. We did our research. I spoke to so many local papers. I worked out there really was a real need there. Everyone was talking about the fact that data was very hard. They wanted to do more data stories, but they just didn't have the skills locally. They didn't have the time locally. So we knew there was a need. We didn't recognize there was such a need as we've discovered, but we worked out there really was a need. We also worked out what success would look like. So we had 3 pillars of deliverables. So one was an engaged network, the other was more public interest stories, and the other was more open data sets. So 3 things that the team had to deliver. And we put numbers to each of those. And we were quite realistic about timing. We've done lots of projects in our organisation where we've thought, okay, we can get something up and running in a month, and realised that never happens. We really built in quite a lot of time to do this properly. I think building the team is really important. It's another thing that I've learnt. It's very easy as a journalist and an editor to appoint another journalist because you know what you're looking for in a journalist. You know the type of person who can go and do the stories, who's reliable, who always checks their facts. But we needed somebody more than a journalist. We absolutely needed a journalist. We tried another project the year before where we hired a technologist, and it just didn't work because they didn't understand what stories are. So we really needed a journalist to lead this team, but we also needed somebody who could be a leader and somebody who was an innovator and ambitious. So we didn't just think about the journalistic skills and producing the stories. We wanted somebody with soft skills. And actually, the person we hired was American. We needed to get her on a visa. Then she had a 3-month notice period with her paper. So, it took us 6 months to hire the person that we actually wanted to hire. But we decided that that was worth it. And the same with the rest of the team. It's a really tricky team to build. We needed certain skill sets. First recruitment round, we had 300 applicants. We didn't hire one single person because they just weren't right. We took 2 recruitment rounds to get the team right. And then the really hard thing, this was my idea. I'd spent 18 months planning this, building a business plan, hiring the team, and then I just had to go, okay, now it's yours. You get on with it because I've got lots of other things to do in my job. That was really hard, but you've got to let your team get on and do what they think is best to deliver the goals. It's not always easy to be brave. We were very lucky. We got a big grant from Google to do this project, which meant we could properly resource it and build a big team. If you can, I would say be ambitious rather than just build up to a project slowly. Go big from the start. Obviously have a plan B in case things fail. But I would also say have a plan C, which is something that we didn't build in. We didn't think, what would we do if this ends up being too successful? And we very quickly had to go and raise more money to bring in extra help and support because our journalistic team were just overwhelmed by the demands of the network. So we're now just about to hire a community organizer who's going to work with the network on stories rather than just the team producing stories and feeding them out to the network. Last few things, stay focused, stick to your mission. We've beaten all our targets, but we've still got, we're still a whole year away from our pilot project. So before we go on to the next stage, we want to keep focused on what we're doing. Everybody in the team knows exactly what the goals are. They know what they're aiming at over the 2-year period that we're running this. There's been loads of problems, little ones and big ones. If you expect them, then they don't become nightmares. I think momentum is a really important thing. After the election, our team was exhausted, but they'd got this amazing thing up and running. The only way it's grown and kept going is because the team has somehow, partly because they're very young and very ambitious, they've got back onto their desks, back to their work, and carried on producing stories. And the other thing is, don't forget to tell everybody. We send out blogs, we do blog posts, we send out newsletters all the time telling people about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why we're successful. And that's my details. That's the Bureau Local Twitter handle if you want to follow it. Quite a complicated email address, but if you go to tbij.com, you'll find Bureau Local quite easily. That's me.
Hi, so, let's just pause this, go backwards. So my name is Justin Arenstein, and I'm actually here speaking about 2 organizations at the moment. I'm a former journalist, so I no longer practice as a journalist, but I now help run something called Code for Africa, which is a civic technology and a news technology network across Africa. We run 8 fully fledged software engineering labs across the continent, which work in support of newsrooms and do various other things. And then we also run as an incubated program a network of investigative newsrooms called ANSIA. Ferial Haffajee, who spoke at the plenary yesterday, is the editor-in-chief. And basically what we try and do is we try and leverage technology and we try and pull donor funding to support and turbocharge investigative journalism across the continent. We try and do it in many ways, which you've just heard that our British colleagues are doing as well, by centralizing some of the more complex tasks like a data unit, hiring data scientists and software engineers into central hubs so that newsrooms don't have to take that expense themselves. This is a map of Africa. If the light's not very good, but all the little red dots are where we've got a physical presence across the continent. What do we do and how do we select stories and projects to invest into? We've got 3 guiding principles. Firstly, even if we're tackling power elites, we try and ensure that everything we do is citizen-focused. If you're not being citizen-focused in your journalism or in your investments into media and into technology, you're going to land up with something that no one cares about and no one consumes. So the first kind of filter that we use to select anything that we do is that one. The second one is that it has to be demand-driven. It's very easy to frame something as bottom-up or bottom of the pyramid, but it's incredibly difficult to figure out what people really care about. So everything we do is premised on a single question that we ask: what keeps people awake at night? Literally, what gives them the cold sweats and the cold shivers about the lives that they're living. It's invariably not about a political elite. It's about simple things: access to water, access to healthcare. Is my kid going to die of a disease that's preventable, but that I can't kind of access for whatever reason? And similar kind of everyday life challenges. And then the third filter that we use is, will whatever we're doing result in a tangible outcome? So not just an output. We don't just want to produce ego kind of reaffirming pieces of journalism. We want to create journalism that moves the world, which invariably means that it has to be incredibly solidly evidence-based, and it has to be engineered in a way that people can use it. So we try and create news that people can use. Doing that in Africa is not that easy. This is a reality of the kind of information that many of our newsrooms work with, and almost all of our technologists. So this is a picture of the Land Records Bureau, the registrar in Kenya. That's literally how they keep track of who owns what land in Kenya. You can't get it online. If you try and do a search about who owns which piece of land, which mining concession, someone goes into a room like this and pulls a file out of a filing cabinet. If that file disappears, then there's no record of who owns or who owned that land. There's no blockchain technology, there's no backup. And land hijacking is a big issue, not just in East Africa, across the continent. So we work aggressively to digitize and back up that kind of data. How do we do it? A couple of ways. We try and protect the Chinese wall between journalism and kind of building the enabling environment or ecosystem that's necessary to power journalism. So we run programs where we embed technologists and what we call data liberators into government agencies, into universities, and their job is to help them become more efficient, but while they're doing that, they're digitizing massive amounts of data. So in Kenya, we've digitized the government gazettes, and then our technologists have used that to extract land ownership records. Every time a piece of land changes hands in Kenya, it has to be published in the Gazette. And we've effectively now built a mirror registry of all land transactions going back 100 years in Kenya, which means suddenly we can analyze who owns what, who owns the resources, the mineral wealth of the country, and then we can look at trends around gender, political ownership, foreign ownership, and so forth. This is an example of a South African one where we embedded into South Africa and into the Treasury, and we helped digitize through OpenUp, which is our local affiliate, digitize all Treasury information that you can find in real time what your local city is doing. The data is just the feedstock. Once that's available, media is facing a massive resource crunch, and they struggle to do anything with that information. So we run a couple of innovation funds. This is 2 of them. We give away each of them $1 million a year. One funds news technologies. The other one funds evidence or data-driven storytelling that is interactive and digital. The links are up there. You can go and have a look, and we can chat about it during the kind of Q&A session. As a result, at any one time, our network is managing over 100 active projects with strong news links. Many of those early investments, going back as far as 2011, are now here presenting. Things like Africa Check, we made the first investments into them. Oxpeckers, environmental journalism, I'll speak about a bit later, are doing some presentations here. Data Wrapper is doing data visualization presentations, and so forth. We take incredibly risky early stage investments into these startups. And we also do a second thing. A startup often scrambles to build just the basic building blocks that it wants to build its idea on top of. So our central labs, which are run by people that we've headhunted from Google, Amazon, and other large technology corporations, also build the enabling technology that people can reuse over and over again, so they don't waste time reinventing the wheel just to be able to realize their idea. And we've done a lot of this for the investigative news sector. Our big focus with investigative journalism is to give journalists tools to help them connect the dots between money, between people, between companies, and between geographies. And we build those as open source tools, which are free to use, and then we help newsrooms implement them and customize them. But it's not just tools and data. There's a big trust issue in the media at the moment, not just globally in the North, also in Africa. And people are sick and tired of this he said, she said journalism, because it's incredibly difficult to figure out who the he and she, which of them is actually credible. So in Africa, we've now kickstarted something called test tube journalism. And what we're doing is we're linking newsrooms up with laboratories which can produce at free initially, but then at very low cost, tests on water samples, soil samples, food samples, and so forth. And just 2 weeks ago in Lagos, the government closed down a whole bunch of slaughterhouses after testing the meat products, one of our journalists, and finding that 80% of them were contaminated with fecal matter. They're busy closing down water bottling factories, again in Lagos, because it's water straight out of the lagoon. And for anyone who's been to Lagos, the lagoon is not a place that you want to kind of immerse yourself into. We're rolling this out across Africa. It's currently active in West Africa and East Africa, and we're looking at coming down south as well. So we're trying to invest into innovative methodologies and pioneering technologies. We have kickstarted drone journalism startups, sensor journalism startups, 360 video startups. The sensor data journalism startups use air and temperature and water sensors to monitor things like climate resilience, climate change, as well as pollution. But storytelling also needs to change. And the big problem with investigative journalism is that we are self-indulgent as journalists. We write to please ourselves, not necessarily to fit our audiences. So we've created something called Illustrated Africa, and we're now linking up graphic novelists and cartoonists with journalists to tell very complex stories. These are examples of the work of a British BBC journalist called Mark Ellison, who does phenomenal work across the continent in the DRC, in East Africa, funded by a sister organization or an affiliate, a kind of a friendly organization, EJC, and ourselves. You should check the work out. It's used extensively by Al Jazeera and others. So that's a background about the kinds of stuff that we do. I want to focus on just a couple of startups without much depth to show you what is possible in Africa, even with limited resources. So 8 months ago, 10 months ago, we invested and founded something called African Drone. It's a network of civic drone pilots across the continent. And initially, people said it's crazy, drones don't really get you can't use them for journalism. We've, in those 8 months, we've done major investigative journalism pieces with Reuters, with Der Spiegel, Welt, BBC, and a number of others, investigating everything from urban inequality. And you might have seen the images of this one in the corner of a golf course with a kind of a shanty town right next to it. They've gone viral. We've had in excess of 20 million hits on just one story series about the inequalities of rich living right next to poor and not caring about the different worlds. We've helped map the whole of Zanzibar Island as part of an investigative story and then built 3D models that people are using to tackle the impact of tourism and the consumption of tourist water for swimming pools and things on normal citizens, and how this actually doesn't empower them, how it shrinks the world that ordinary citizens live in so that others can have nice green lawns. These guys are working in South Africa with Carte Blanche and others to do investigative drone journalism at minimal cost. It's costing no more money to produce these stories now that we've established teams with equipment than it is to have a normal camera person on a story. A second quick startup that we invested into, so these are separate organizations that pay their own way. They're startups. A second organization, which is also presenting here, is something called Oxpeckers, founded and run by Fiona McLeod, one of South Africa's oldest environmental journalists, or veteran environmental journalists, and very old school. Through workshopping with us and figuring out what she wanted to do that was new, she jumped into something called geojournalism, using satellite technology, cadastral data, and maps to tackle land grabs, environmental crimes, and climate resilience, and how they're reshaping our world. And has also had great market success, where they're now fully sustainable. She's got a network of associates over Southern Africa, and they are, have a hybrid business model, partially donor funded, but increasingly funded by media buying packages themselves. Two other quick ones, which are slightly different, is that it's fairly easy to do startups because you're finding someone who is a Kickstarter, who's got a clear idea of what they want to do and are hopefully servicing a gap in the market. It's slightly more difficult to do innovation or to kind of help people leapfrog the challenges that old media are facing when you try and re-engineer a company from the inside out. So these are two examples of how we're doing that. This is something called PesaCheck in East Africa. It's verification and fact-checking. We helped invest into it just before fake news became an issue, so before the Trump era. And what it does is it tackles the numbers that people use in everyday news and pronouncements and checks those numbers, because numbers actually shape our world. Whether it's a budget number, whether it's a number of people who are supposedly have a disease in a country, it shapes public policy and it shapes allocation of resources. It's now in 3 countries, and we've established viral units inside large conglomerate media newsrooms, where it's re-engineering those newsrooms from the inside out. And the final one I wanted to showcase was building data teams and data units. So the easiest, quickest way to re-engineer a newsroom, an old world dinosaur newsroom, is to put inside a small data team with resources and with executive support from the ownership and the management to slowly start changing the everyday workflow of that newsroom. It's a difficult, laborious, long-winded task, but it's easier than trying to train. And this is one at Wananchi newspaper, which is the second largest newspaper in Tanzania, in a country where there's a statistics law that if you misquote government data, you get charged criminally and your newspaper gets closed down. They closed down 3 or 4 newspapers over the past month for misquoting government information or for criticizing the regime. So it's in a difficult political situation, and yet they're having great success at using data to push the investigative envelope. It's a 4-person team and funded by the newspaper after our initial investment. So those were just some quick highlights that hopefully we're going to dig into during the Q&A session. Everything that we invest into and everything that we build is open source, open data, Creative Commons. And the principle is that if we're investing into public goods, others can build on top of it. So these are our GitHub repositories. GitHub is like a shopping catalog on the internet for computer code and for data. Code for SA has now changed its name to OpenUp. They're the South African one. And then the lessons that we learn about how we select projects and make investments, we've turned into something called civic patterns. It's cheeky, sometimes it's irreverent, but it's a distillation of some of the investments kind of philosophies and guidance or kind of frameworks that we use to make investment decisions. You can follow us on Twitter. We've abandoned email. It's an evil technology. So I'll tweet out the link to the presentation, and each of those things I've showed you has got a link that you can go and have a look at. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's a QWERTY, I'm not used to it. The dot? Not to,
Well, just take
yes.
this through here.
It's okay. Thank you. So hi, I am Monia Ben Hamadi. I'm the editor-in-chief of Tunisian media named Inkyfada. First, I wanted to warn you, my English is very bad, so if you see me, if I say wrong words or something, it's okay. In Tunisia, we speak mostly Tunisian and French, so I will try to make myself understood. And I'm waiting for it to work. Today, I'm not making a presentation. I wanted to talk about a story. One of the last stories we published. A few months ago, my colleagues and I were training in audio documentary techniques. During the training, sad news comes out in the south of Tunisia, in the desert. One of the protesters of a sit-in was killed. We were in Tunis, far from there, and we followed the news like everyone else. In the media, the officials say it was an accident. Editorials and columnists on television, television show, give a bad image of the protesters. Once they are terrorists, once they are founded by political parties, often they are accused to increase the economical crisis in Tunisia, because you know in Tunisia we are struggling with economic crisis after the revolution that came on 2011. But in the flood of this fast food news and all the media was covering this event, the protesters themselves in the desert, on the sit-in, were invisible. So what really happened to them? Who are these protesters sleeping in a camp in the middle of the desert? Why did they stop all activities, etc.? Even though the event was largely covered, something was missing. So we decided to spend a few days in the sit-in with the protesters. We knew how they lived there, why they were there. We knew what are their struggles. We knew that the army helped them to continue their movement. We understood how they financed their sit-in. But how to report all the information we have obtained, how to report the atmosphere, the emotions, how to make protesters visible. So you know, it's far from Tunis, and it's far from every city, big city in Tunis. They were in the middle of the desert, next to oil companies. So we decided to make a web documentary from this unique subject, a sit-in in the desert. So we produced a subtitled audio, documentary, a photo essay, interactive videos, and a timeline to know the chronology of the events. So the purpose of this webdoc is to draw a portrait of the event as close as possible to reality. Because reality is not just facts. It's composed of images, sounds, emotions, figures, context, history, geography. So to transcribe all these facets of reality, we talked with our designers and our developers in the newsroom. And the originality of Inkyfada is that in the newsroom, we have with us designers and developers to help us tell the story. And the project of El Kamour was born about this sit-in. So we developed a podcast with a subtitle, if it works. And all kinds of stuff, video, interactive video, infographics, timeline, etc. This project, you can see it on the web, can summarize what Inkyfada is, actually. Inkyfada is a slow journalism-based and long-form oriented Tunisian webzine dedicated to investigation and interactive stories. It's a result, as I told you, of collaboration between journalists, designers, artists, web developers, and external contributors to make the stories, the storytelling different and visual. So Inkyfada then became an actor in the Tunisian media landscape and the leading experience in the Arab region. So we are part of the ICIG, we launched Panama Papers and Swiss Leaks, etc. And now Paradise Papers. We are now part of GIJN network, as the first Arab media in this network. But we have a very big problem in Inkyfada, actually. It took too much time. It took too much time to integrate those rich content, interactive content, interactive map, etc. So our IT team are now developing a CMS solution to make it easier for us and for other media later, for the journalists to integrate rich content without the need of the developers. So we are now developing this new solution to, no, it's a question, I'm sorry. So Incube is a CMS solution made for media and journalists, so they can integrate those kind of content and rich content without technical knowledge. We are working on a set of tools that enable easier publishing of technically sophisticated content and reports, and help other media as much as our media to make the content look different and to use innovation for the storytellings.
Hello, good morning. I know we've been here for close to an hour now, so can we all stand up if you don't mind? It's not a PE lesson, it's just, can we all stand up? Yeah, so you can expand this for me. Yes, yoga session. I'm kidding. So let's stretch, Go up, yes. Come down. Yes, greet the ground. Go up again. Sideways. To the other side. You can sit down. Yeah, I need the sound.
Is there sound?
We can't hear. Sorry, guys. We're trying to fix the audio here.
It's coming up.
Sorry, audio. Can you hear? Who's working on the audio? Sorry, it's something short. Can I start?
You want to restart it?
Yeah, it's just something. Sorry, it's something short. I want to introduce the organization I work for in a way that video can tell it better. Hello, good morning once again. My name is Kassim Mohamed, and you probably have seen by now Africa Uncensored. Some of you might be asking yourselves, yes, we've seen the promo, but what exactly is this company all about? Africa Uncensored was formed, or the idea came to be in the year 2011. My friends and I, John Nalanamu, Mohamed Ali, who is also now a member of parliament in Kenya, met in Nairobi. We were tired of censorship. We've done stories for over a decade. I mean, like for me, I came to the newsroom in 2004, towards the end of 2004, and the same applies for my friends. For over 10 years, close to a decade, we've been doing stories, investigative pieces, year in, year out, different media houses in Kenya. But the problem was, when you do a great story, it goes on air. What happens next? Or sometimes you come up with a great idea, it gains traction online, on television, but sometimes the story doesn't see the light of day. Or it's mutilated in such a way that you ask yourself, is this really what we've done? Hence the name Africa Uncensored. Sorry. So that's why the name Africa Uncensored came up. And it was formed in the year, the idea came to picture in 2011, but we registered in 2015. A research that was done by the company we worked for at that time suggested that investigative journalism was a very strong point for KTN at that time where we were working. So we thought, why not venture out and do our own stuff? The difference between other organizations and us is Africa Uncensored is a limited company. It's not an NGO, it's not a CBO. And this is how we work. So in the year 2015, when we were still working at KTN, we went to visit a friend of ours. Her name is Nancy Kachungira. She works for the BBC now. She was also an anchor at KTN. But then she had experience of setting up a startup. She knew how to set up, and she had ideas because she comes from Uganda, and she set up a company there. So we spoke with her, and we went to a place called Elementaita. That's why I put in there the Elementaita Declaration. So at that time, she spoke to us about understanding our target audience. When you want to do a startup, you need to know, why am I getting into this? Who exactly is my target audience? And that is why we went to Elementaita. So Nancy, our great friend, along with a friend of ours from Code for Africa, his name is David Lemanyan, helped us to understand and figure out Africa Uncensored and come up with our target audience. I remember we spent 3 days in Elementaita. So we came up with a guy called Devi, that you can see. Devi is a 27-year-old man. He works in Nairobi, the capital. He has a girlfriend, but then he has access to social media. He's on Twitter, he's on Facebook, he has access to YouTube. So Devi is a picture that came to mind for all of us. That is our target audience. So if you're thinking about a startup, think about your target audience. It's very important. So at that time, we also learned that there is need for us to put structures in place. It's not just an office. Yes, you can have computers, you can have an office, but then you need structures. You need human resource, you need an accountant to make sure all your paperwork is in place, and especially if you're an investigative journalist, you need to put that into consideration, because those who you are investigating will come after you tomorrow if you don't pay your taxes. So don't give them a chance at all. Quality over quantity. Sometimes when you work for newsrooms, it's like, it's just rolling, you know? You're told, oh, there's a news story, you know, you have to do this documentary within a couple of days or months. But then, for us at Africa Uncensored, we told ourselves, quality matters more than quantity. We don't have to post anything every day. We don't have to post. We wait until we get something that's tangible, something that we can work with. Networking, we figured out we don't live in an island, or I wish I had one of my own. You need to interact with people, you need to talk to people and network and understand exactly how things work. We've learned a great deal from people from OCCRP, Code for Africa, AIPC, and the Global Investigative Journalism Network, as well as Wits University here. So you need to network and understand how the world works. Why Africa Uncensored? We hope to be the producers and distributors of premium investigative content from the African continent. We don't want, international journalists to parachute into Africa and tell us what's happening here. That has been the case in the past, at least in some places where I know. They parachute, they spend a number of days, use fixers from the ground from Africa, go back and tell us the story. We want to limit that in a way. We'll be working with them, but we also want to tell our own stories. Africa Uncensored also has another arm, apart from doing documentaries and producing. We also have something called Investigate 101, where we train young, upcoming journalists. For example, last year, we trained 10, both men and women. So we bring in trainers from across the world. Last year, we brought in 2 trainers from the UK, Steve Holloway and Judy Arenstein, who both worked. One of them worked at ITN and the other one at the BBC for a very long time. So they have the international experience. We brought them to Nairobi, and they did the training for 10 young investigative journalists from Nairobi. You must be asking yourselves, you are a limited company, so how do you make money when the taps run dry? So what we think about as a limited company, we do commissioned work. We work with big organizations. For example, we did one documentary with a friend of ours, who is also a filmmaker, for Al Jazeera. So they commission us to do the work. We also do syndication. Syndication meaning we come up with program ideas ourselves, we produce the documentary, and then sell it to media houses. So we've had very close working relationship with our former employer. That's why it's always good not to burn your bridges. So our work has always been, aired on KTN. So that's where syndication comes in. But also, we've been receiving, and lucky enough, we've been very lucky to receive support from donors, such as the Kenya Media Program under HIVOS. We've received some support from Forum Sud. Open Society have been amazing, for us at least, and also Henrik Ball. The other stream of financing we have is video on demand. Video on demand means we're working currently with an organization that aggregates content. So we produce like 5 to 10 minutes of features, and then that goes on their platform. So they give us money as per the number of views. So they do the marketing, we don't do it ourselves. So what kind of platforms do we have ourselves as Africa Uncensored, apart from being producers of documentaries? Television is very important, especially in East Africa. When people see and watch things, the impact is greater, in my opinion, than when they read it. So we work with, as I said, the local TV stations in Kenya. Plus, of course, we have our online platforms. We have a website, www.africauncensored.net. We're also on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter. You can follow us on Facebook as well. But then we're planning to create a mobile app very soon, inshallah, if that works. So our content will go on there. Investigate 101, I spoke about that. Tips for you. Startup is not easy at all. Today, if you feel like you're angry at your employer, don't just wake up and say, I want to do my own stuff and I want to do this and that. Think before you do it. We've learned it the hard way. Think about, why does the organization exist? Why do I want to have an Africa Uncensored? We thought about it for a very long time. Remember, we had a meeting in 2011, And Africa Uncensored was launched in 2016, at the beginning of 2016. So we spent a very 5 good years to think about this. The second thing is how clear and compelling is the purpose of your organization or company. If you don't have a very candid vision and mission, it most likely might fail. How unique and valuable are the services your organization is providing? How different are you from the BBC, Al Jazeera? You can watch it on TRT. There are all these other channels. Everyone does documentaries. So how different are you from all these other platforms? So you have to make sure you understand exactly what you're planning to do. Do you have market awareness? I know we are all journalists, but then you need to think as a business person as well. Get out of that shell. I know you can do a great introduction. I know you can do a great feature. I know you're a great writer. The question is, do you understand the market? That you can solve that problem by either commissioning a research company if you have the money, or doing your own small-time research by talking to other people who have done this before you. Do you understand your target audience? That is key for the broadcast journalism world. When you talk about a documentary, I'm doing a documentary on terrorism. Yes, you are. But then who's listening to you? Are you making any impact? For example, let me give you a story. In 2013, we did a documentary called The Executioner. It was a documentary about systematic killing of terror suspects. We even had proof. We even had situations where we were able to understand who did it. We even spoke with some of those guys who did it off camera. But then, when it went on air, there was backlash, from different sides. Some people were saying, you guys are supporting terrorism. You guys are not patriotic enough to think about Kenya. Then, a few days, I remember it went on air on the 5th of September. By 21st of September, there was a Westgate terror attack. And now that's when hell broke loose. Everyone was like, you see, you guys are like these, you guys are like that. But then we stood our ground. We said, for us to be able to move forward as a country that thinks about human rights, as a country that understands that everyone's life matters, we have to be able to tell these stories. And I think at that particular time, we didn't think about our target audience. We didn't think about the impact our story will have. So that's very important for you to be able to understand your target audience. And after Westgate happened, we did a documentary called Wolves at Westgate. That was a different story for a different day again. Something else happened. So anyway, target audience is very important. You have to be able to understand who you're talking to. What is your expansion and growth plan? Do you have a plan for your company? For example, at Africa Uncensored, we gave ourselves 3 years to think about East Africa. Do stories as much as we can and file stories as much as we can in East Africa, and then expand our wings, grow our tentacles. You cannot be able to, if you are born today, don't expect to run tomorrow. It takes 9 months as a gestation period for you to grow inside the womb of your mom, and then you're born, labor pains happen, rhythmic contractions. She goes to the hospital. A few days later, or maybe a day later, she's out of hospital, and that's when you start growing. A few months into your existence, you crawl, and then you walk. So you have to be able to understand the company cannot just come into the picture today and expect to get contracts from big companies tomorrow. No, it doesn't work like that. And this is something a friend from the Bureau has mentioned. Success. Do you have criteria for success and performance measures? Everyone at our company, we are 12 of us, has deliverables. And I'm very happy Monia is here, the head of the camera unit. He also has deliverables for his own unit. So the cameraman has to perform. If there's no story, he's working on something else, either whether it's archiving or footage or something. So you have to be able to understand and create a culture of friendship, a culture of a family. And our CEO, who you saw in the promo, a great guy, one of the best script writers in the region, in my opinion, has created a culture of coexistence among us. So we treat each other as brothers and sisters. So that doesn't necessarily mean, that cannot always be the case for each company, but you have to create a culture of understanding, sell the idea to these people so that they can be able to understand exactly what you're thinking. IO process is very clear. You know, you might be the director of the company or the CEO of the company, but you can't just walk to the bank and sign a check of 10 million for yourself. No, there has to be structures. If you want some money, or maybe you're going out on assignment, the camera person and I are the same. So we have to be able to follow certain structures. Maximize on your strengths and address your weaknesses. All of us have weaknesses. And I'm sure this company is 1.5 years old, and it has won the Kenya Media Award for the year 2017. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just very cognizant of time. So I just wanted to get one quick question and open it up for probably 1 or 2 questions. So I mean, there's one clear thread that I can see through all of this, which is, you know, the need to prepare and be very clear about what you want. The one question I did have is, things don't always go as well. And Rich, I just wanted to ask you, what was Plan B? What if it hadn't worked well? What was the plan?
Well, our plan B was that we had 2 years of funding, and then that would be the end. So you mentioned in the intro is, how do you kill off babies that just don't work? I mean, in this project in particular, we have very definitive funding, and that was built into our plan. We decided that we needed 2 years to establish this, and then we could go out and try and make it sustainable. So our plan B was that this would be the end. It would be a failed experiment, but we had 2 years to get it there. We've done 8 months, and it's definitely not going to fail. But we have done other projects which we've just kept going and going and going and going, and actually really planning around what you're going to do if this doesn't succeed, and really working out how to get out of it is really important.
So I'll just add that one thing to all that great list that you had, which is, how do you get out of it at the end of it if it doesn't work? We've got time probably for a few questions. There, I think you're gonna have to yell.
This question is for Kassim. Firstly, thank you for the great presentation. How did you go about getting funds for your company? Because at the end of the day, it's all about building your resources. So could you just take us to, because when you quit a full-time job or a company, that resources is obviously the biggest concern. So how do you go about that process? And who do you approach? What were the strategies that you adopted?
I think, you know, quitting a job, a full-time job where you have health insurance, where your family is okay, is very hard for anyone. And that too applied to us. So what we did, we thought for 5 good years. You know, remember we met in the year 2011, and the company was launched in 2016, and Namo and I resigned in December of 2015 from the company we were working. So we had to talk to different people. I remember even talking to Justin, talking to Evelyn, you know, Khadija from OCCRP now. And they told us it's not easy out there. And that's why we did not register it as an NGO or you know, community-based organization. So what we did, after talking to our friends, they referred us to some of their friends from the Kenya Media Program under HIVOS. So they gave us some money to buy at least some stuff, like, you know, computers. It wasn't enough, but we had to take a risk, which was worth it, I think. Sometimes you just have to take the plunge, but think about it very carefully. So talk to friends, look for organizations that can help you at the beginning, and probably if you have some savings, that can help.
I'd like to ask you all a mundane question. I mean, first of all, I'm really thrilled to hear people asking the kind of questions you guys have been asking. You know, questions beyond how do we Pardon me. I'm really thrilled to hear you guys asking the kind of questions you're asking, you know, beyond like, can we do a great story? You know, like, where's the market? What do people need? All of this stuff. It's great. This is, you know, this is classic business thinking. And I have a very mundane question. Where are you recruiting the people to run your business operations? How are you finding people who understand journalism but who understand business well enough to help you get over the hump? Because I don't think that's particularly easy. How are you doing it?
So I'll take a quick stab at that. So I think that we're kind of lucky in Africa that journalists in Africa have never had the luxury really, outside maybe of South Africa, of the Chinese Wall. Journalists in some parts of this continent, when you're appointed as a journalist in the Congo and in much of Nigeria, you get given a business card, not a salary. You go out and you're supposed to earn your own money, and that's why we have the problems we do with media in Africa. But it's also bred a far more entrepreneurial approach, where people see the gap, they see the angle, and people work hard and they moonlight. So outside of South Africa, most journalists hold down 2 or 3 jobs and they're moonlighting. Speaking about Kassim, you're freelancing on the side, you kind of, with the acceptance of your editors, because they know they can't pay you enough. So people have always understood that you've got to find small, diversified revenue streams to pay for this passion. Where are we finding the other people? We're going and we're knocking on large corporate doors, banks, Google, Amazon, and we're telling people, we're finding the people who are looking slightly unhappy, and we have a conversation with them that goes something like, your soul is shriveling and dying. You're building wish fulfillment kind of technologies or services to get someone a pizza when you could be saving a society or tackling a large problem. And literally in about 50 to 60% of those conversations, people jump ship. And all we ask them for is 2 years. And after 2 years, we say, look, take a sabbatical. And after 2 years, very few of them actually return to the mainstream. But we're ruthless. So coming back to your question, we kill off about 50% of our projects per year. We pull the plug on them. Even if they're getting stories published and they're kind of puttering along, the reality is that they're not ever going to go anywhere, that people are going to have a good old age. So rather pull the plug early and help them then transition to something new. So many of our most successful projects have been people who've done 2 or 3 failed journalism startups. They've learned the lessons, they've had hard knocks, they've understand that they need to moderate the passion with kind of a strong kind of business team behind them, and that they need to be clear about not muddling how you make money with how you create kind of great content.
About how we became actually a businessman or woman, because we are all journalists or developers or designers, and we were not made to think money or think business model. But what we are doing in Inkyfada is more than innovating in the technological way, but also in the business model. So we, as journalists, we became a part of the business model with the trainings, with all the stuff that we are doing that can bring us money to make Inkyfada live. With our NGO, because Inkyfada is ruled by an NGO, and we have to diversify activities in the trainings, in the website development, and in other stuff, always in the media domain, to have money. So we learn to be like a businessman and a woman with the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an excellent question, actually, because a lot of these organisations are run by journalists, and journalists just don't have a clue how to run businesses or teams. I mean, I think the points that has been made here, you learn from your mistakes. I think one of the things that I did very early on was try and use my journalistic skills and go and find people who have done this before and talk to them and build up a set of mentors. You know, I held loads of roundtables and workshops before I launched Bureau Local. Some of those were about technology, because I didn't know anything about data or technology. Some of those were about local journalism, and some of those were about actually launching a small, innovative new projects. So, you know, I went out and got the business help and took advice. Again, that's something that journalists are not particularly good at traditionally. But I learned from all the mistakes that we'd made in the past that if I didn't go and get advice on how to run a business as well as all the journalistic things, then it would fail.
And did you recruit people to do that work for you?
No, I ran round workshops. I sort of did half-day workshops where I actually went and did lots of research about people who could help me, brought them into half a day and workshopped and asked them about the things that I should be doing, about building success plans, business plans, you know, all this stuff that I just didn't have a clue how to do.
Did your team participate in those workshops?
Some of them, not all of them. The ones that I thought were appropriate.
One of the best things that journalists do is they're very smart, and one of the worst things that journalists do is they're very smart. So we tend to be really arrogant. We're really out of time. I do.
Sorry, can I mention something about the...
Tell you, we're under pain of whatever to get people out and moving. Why don't you catch up with them right afterwards?
You've got 5 minutes.
I do?
Yes.
Oh my God.
You can do a quick...
Okay, go.
Sorry
Okay.
about the money.
Get killed by Kaplan. Okay.
Sorry, there's something I need to mention. The professor mentioned something. In terms of getting the right people, I think business journalists within newsrooms understand finance more than anyone else because, you know, they cover companies. And so for us, we got a friend of ours who's also become a partner. His name is Wanjala. So he was a business journalist at the same company where we were working, and now he's the person in charge of business development and anything to do with finance.
You're very lucky because as a business journalist, I can tell you most business journalists don't know a damn thing about running a business. So I will say that don't underestimate how cool journalists are or how cool journalism seems to everybody else. I know it seems mundane to us, but when you do go out and you pitch to technologists especially, they love the idea that you know, they can work with journalists.
Okay.
Grab one quick question.
I'm here.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
All right, this is for Code for Africa. What would you say are the criteria that you have used or that have shaped your decisions to partner with particular organizations?
Sorry, what is the what that we've used to shape?
The criteria,
Criteria.
yeah, that you have used, you know, to decide on who to work with.
So I ran through a couple of them in my presentation, and we've got a checklist that we run through. But the reality is that we actually invest into people. It's not investing into technologies and kind of all those criteria we have. The very first thing that we do is we kind of figure out if the individual who's driving this idea, and there's usually one or two of them in an organization or in a project, if they've actually got what it takes, meaning the skills, the passion, and the vision. And secondly, if they're going to be able to stick it out. Because as Kassim said, many people only do this mid-career. When you've got houses, you've got a mortgage, you've got kind of healthcare to care about or to worry about. So if they don't have a plan where that can get taken care of and they can focus 100% on what they're doing, then invariably you're setting yourself up for failure. So firstly, the people, and then secondly, are they genuinely moving the needle? Are they pushing kind of the envelope so that they're doing something new? So our mandate is to help media leapfrog past the crisis that they're facing. So what we do is we aggressively try and find new things that can help move not the media along, because we don't care if the media dies. What's more important is if journalism survives. So kind of can we move journalism forward through who we're investing into? So I'd say those are the two kind of unspoken, hidden criteria that we need. And then there are all the normal things. I think famously, we only ask people to fill in a form with 7 short questions. We don't ask you, like many other grant-making organizations, to fill in massive kind of application forms. If you answer those 7 questions and they limit it to like 50 words, 100-word answers each, if that's a compelling kind of argument in there and the people kind of thing lines up, then we sit down and we actually develop a business plan together. Because the reality is we've probably got better business strategists than the kind of the project is applying. So we can help them figure out if it will really work at all or not.
Let's get one very, very quick question in and a very short answer in, and then we can, that Kaplan will.
Okay, I want to ask the issue of sustainability in terms of the startups. How do you ensure that whatever you have started, it doesn't fail, or you sustain it, it goes on. And then the issue of balance. I've heard the other speaker was talking of you can be freelancing when you're starting these startups. But then you find when you're freelancing and you're also trying to start something out, you find sometimes your startup might be suffering. How do you ensure that there is balance?
So I'll take a quick stab, very short. So the freelance question, I think maybe I wasn't very clear. I was saying that often the people that we invest into have already been freelancers, so they understand how to attach value to their content. If you're doing a startup, you don't want to be moonlighting. You must focus on the startup and nothing else. How do you build sustainability? It's difficult. And so as a principle, you need to accept that failure, it's a cliche, but failure is not bad. Fail quickly. So give yourself a time limit and say 6 months or 10 months to see if this idea is going to work. And stick to it. If it's not working, pull the plug and do the next thing based on the lessons that you've learned. But the best route to sustainability is don't have a single revenue stream or a single kind of revenue-based model. Diversify your revenue streams. It's better earning 5 small incomes that add up to something better, big, than one big one that is, if it fails, then you're completely wiped out. So kind of create a kind of risk-proof business model that relies on multiple clients. If you can do that, you're great. And then if you're doing a startup, try and only launch once you've got your first customer signed. Because it means that at least then you can use that to kind of go to other people and say, look, these guys are already kind of investing trust in us. You should kind of take our service as well.
So clearly this is a sustained conversation, which you can carry on outside afterwards. There is time. So thanks very much to all of you. And to all of you.